Hello, everyone. Welcome to this edition of the Octopus 101 webinar. I'm your host, John Bristow. I'm a member here of the team here at Octopus Deploy. Thank you for your time and attention. It's great to see you all. This is a webinar for folks who have never seen Octopus before or maybe are curious about what it is and how it works. And so in this webinar, for the next 30 minutes or so, we're going to walk you through the paces of what Octopus is, how it works, and probably most importantly, why you should consider using it for your software deployments. So thanks for joining us today. Again, thank you for your time and attention. Hope everyone's having a great day. And this is a new sort of background we have for today's webinar, which is all kind of Tron-like, which is awesome. Anyways, I will go ahead and switch my screen over to present. Here we go. So if you have never seen Octopus Deploy, if you've never seen Octopus before, this is our website at octopus.com. You can sign up for a free trial there. And all we need is obviously an email address. But once that's set up, you can provision a instance in the cloud and set it all up and you'll be ready to go. So before we go into the demo and all that, I'd like to just kind of lay the land of where we're at in terms of software deployments, etc. So just to set the stage here. So again, my name is John Bristow. If you have any questions at all, you can feel free to reach me at this email address, john.bristow@octopus.com. If you have any follow-up questions, feel free to let me know. I'm happy to take the time to answer them. So in this webinar, what we're going to be doing is as I said before, taking a look at Octopus Deploy, specifically how it works and, again, why you should use it. We're going to take a look at some fundamental concepts around Octopus. So there are these concepts that we have in Octopus that are fundamental to understand. So we have concepts like projects, concepts like deployment process, concepts like releases. These are really critical to understanding how a deployment works in the world of Octopus, and we'll be talking in detail about each one of those things. We're then going to shift gears and talk a little bit about the deployment process. So we're going to basically see how the rubber hits the road in terms of how you define the deployment process and why they're important in terms of their definitions for applying those to an application environment. And then finally, we'll wrap things up by talking about how to trigger a deployment through a CI process, namely something that does a build, like GitHub Actions, for example. So that's what we're going to cover in today's webinar, which is great. And if you have any questions along the way, we're happy to answer them live. All right. So let's start off by setting the stage. So this is the typical world that you'll see within an environment today. So you have typically an app that you build. You have a DevOps engineer who's taking that app and deploying it, and they're possibly using a set of deployment scripts, more than likely using a set of deployment scripts to deploy that application to production. And this is ultimately getting software into the hands of customers. It's just a pretty easy setup. And when looking at it from this perspective, basic deployments are easy, right? You have an end-to-end sort of pipeline, and you go from start to finish and nothing involved, nothing sort of, there's no concept of like rollbacks, there's nothing concept of tenants, etc. So life is great. This is why the DevOps engineer has a smile on his or her face. However, as you get a little bit more complicated, those complex deployments can be really, really tricky. So for example, you have different versions of software. Those require different versions of deployment scripts. You also have updates for particular types of customers and also environments. So it's not just deploying to the cloud. It could be deploying to environments like Kubernetes. In addition to that, you have different types of customers. So different customers run different versions. So for example, did we get the right version of the right version of the application to the customer? Did the customer get the right updates for this application that they're looking for? And so now life becomes a little bit more difficult. It's still manageable, but it is more difficult. However, as we quickly kind of expand this out, it can get life can get very, very hard for the DevOps engineer as you grow and as you scale. So for example, the typical sort of end-to-end where you're just doing V1, no problem. But as you add things like tenants, as you ask questions around, how did we go about the deployment? Oh, we have to roll up the database, or possibly there was a failure. We have to roll back. Those are challenges that are difficult to mitigate in a simply script-based world. So deployment scripts are very brittle. They have no concept of potentially rollback unless you're rolling these things yourself. and they don't make life easy for the DevOps engineer. In fact, life gets very, very difficult for the DevOps engineer. So the solution here is for a product like Octopus Deploy. Octopus Deploy makes your deployments very easy. These are complex deployments, but they're simple and easy to understand when in the world of Octopus Deploy. And this is exactly why you use a tool like Octopus Deploy. Deployment is now managed within Octopus, and it is your single deployment automation platform. It is the source of truth to manage all your enterprise deployment processes with consistency and compliance. These are two important aspects of this. And the way we do this is through a number of what we call terms. This is part of our model we have, but in Octopus, we scope out this concept of what are called tenants, which you'll see in a sec. And tenants make it very easy for you to manage these sorts of environments through an ongoing basis. So Octopus Deploy is part of a best of breed pipeline. So in that pipeline, you'll have a variety of tools that you'll use. So if we take a look at things like issue management, you have tools like Jira. This is a very solved problem. This is when you're scoping out applications. If you're doing anything around around development and script running, this is, again, a very well-known space. You have many CI solutions out there. GitHub is a very prominent example. Build itself is done through workloads. GitHub Actions is one such workload environment. And on the other side, we have a variety of environments. Azure, cloud providing service is a very well-known and solved problem. However, there is this gap in there, which is deployment. And this is typically one that is tried to be addressed by CI, that is continuous integration. However, continuous integration is not continuous delivery, or CD as we like to call it. And so that's where Octopus Deploy comes in. Octopus Deploy is your solution for basically providing that enterprise platform solution for doing CD. And as I said before, we support a variety of solutions that are available. So this is something that you can use for a variety of environments, things like TeamCity from JetBrains, Jenkins, very popular, as well to a variety of environments as well. And that's where we play. In addition to that, we also have integration with a variety of other tools and processes as well. So for example, if you're wanting to provision Octopus Deploy, we have a Terraform provider for that. If you're wanting to do ITSM, we have integration with ServiceNow. There are a variety of other integrations as well that we can talk about. But that's essentially how the world looks. So now what I'd like to do is I'd like to shift gears and talk a little bit about what Octopus Deploy looks like when you're using it. So this is Octopus Deploy. This is the environment that you'll see when you fire it up. And this is, again, when you start up a trial, this is what it will look like. This is our dashboard summary. And in our dashboard, we have our projects and we have our various environments that we want to scope out. But let's start from the beginning. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a new space. And I want to show you the environment example here. So I'm going to create a new space. I'm going to call it Octopus 101. And let's go ahead and sign myself as the manager, because that's going to be pretty important. And what I'd like to do is show you now what that environment looks like when you start from scratch. So from scratch, when you start up a new environment or space inside of Octopus Deploy, you'll be provided with this sort of hands-on tour of how you can go from basically application to deployment. So let's go ahead and click on the Get Started. And the first question it's going to ask me is, okay, what's the name of your project? And typically this will be a website or something that you're building out. And this is just a way, it's a moniker for describing what it is that you're targeting. Underneath these options, you'll notice there's a few things that I can highlight here. So first and foremost, you can actually have this project available as a text file in source control. We have a feature called config as code, which is basically a text representation of what you're creating inside of the Octopus UI. So you can actually use version control for this as well. And that's kind of what we're highlighting here. We also specify other things like a description. We can specify a group and a lifecycle. Don't worry about those features for now. All we're doing is we're just basically creating a project which lets you manage these software applications across a variety of deployment processes. So create a new web app project. The second question it's going to ask you is, okay, what are the environments that you want to specify for your deployment? So environments are they're just a name, and they can be basically representative of anything. But typically what you'll see in a lot of environments or QA where you're doing software deployments is development, staging, and production. There are other ones as well, but these are ways in which you can define the flow that your software goes across your organization. And then once that's done, so we create a project, we create environments. Now we're ready to establish what's called the deployment process. This is where we take our application and we move it into those a variety of environments defined through a series of steps. So a process is a series of steps that will run through and execute in order to deploy software. And this is important because these steps are not only they're robust, they're reliable, but they're also repeatable. And we'll talk about the advantages of this. But as you start to build out your knowledge of Octopus, you'll see that it's actually a lot more reliable and robust than, say, a deployment script that you would typically write by hand. So let's go ahead and create a process. You can also, if you wish, use the sample processes that we have. We support a variety of environments such as PowerShell, Bash, and others if you so choose. Those are options that you can choose if you so wish. But I'll go ahead and create a process here. Now, the process editor is a very hands-on sort of WYSIWYG environment that allows you to pick and choose steps that you have available to define your deployment process. So you can see we have a variety of categories here. So we have process steps for scripts, so you can run a simple script. You can run ones for Kubernetes, for Terraform. We have scripts for steps for Windows Server, for example. We also have a wide variety of steps that have been defined by the community. We have over 520 steps defined for a variety of platforms that don't come out of the box. And so these and other sorts of steps you can pick and choose to define your deployment process. So the simplest one, and arguably the most popular one, is this one here called run a script. This is basically a script that you can run to do a variety of actions as part of your deployment process. So this is the editor experience for defining steps. So remember, a step is a series, or steps are a series of actions that run as part of a deployment process. So we'll give the step a name, and we'll say, okay, the script for this is going to be defined inline here. So we'll just say, write host, hello, hello. I got to turn off Grammarly here. Sorry, I got Grammarly turned on here, and I'm going to just turn it off here for this application. Sorry about that. Hello, world. So I'm utilizing PowerShell here, but I have a variety of languages I can choose. I can define these as Bash, C#, F#, and Python if I want. I can also insert a variety of what are called variables. Variables are a very powerful mechanism that you'll need when defining deployment processes. So you may want to define you may want to utilize defined system variables, or you can define your own. And this is really important when defining deployment scripts or deployment processes rather, because this is what you will use to define environments for different variables for different environments, and you can use them as part of your script as you run them. So we've defined our script as just outputting something to the host, which is hello world. We can run this on a variety of locations. So we have this concept of what are called workers. We can define workers are basically agents that run on servers that you want to run. If we're defining to a cloud region, I can define that easily. We define a couple of worker instances here for a SaaS application. So you can use Ubuntu or Windows if you so wish. And I'm going to just choose to run this on Windows. And then I can define a variety of other options as well if I so choose. So this is basically the way in which you define a step here for this execution. You notice that when I do this, inside this well here, I have this script step that's defined as part of my deployment process. So now that I have my deployment process defined, again, this is a very simple deployment process. The next thing I can do is I can go ahead and create a release. So I'll say, let's go create a release here. And inside the release here will allow me to define a bunch of things for this release itself. So this is where you'll typically do semantic versioning. This is where you'll add release notes. Release notes can be generated as part of what are called build info, but we'll just go ahead and define these here. When I create a release, what I'm doing is I'm creating a snapshot of all the things that have gone into this as part of this release itself. So a snapshot is a current state of affairs of what the script is, where it's going, the variables used, the Git resources, the packages, that is your application. All of that stuff goes into this snapshotted file, which is a release, and is used as part of the deployment. The reason why we do this is because you want releases to be consistent across the various stages of your life cycle. So when you go from various environments, say you can go from deployment to production, you want to make sure that that release can be consistent across those things. And so we snapshot the release to do that. And so let's go ahead and now deploy this to development. So it has all the parameters here for doing the deployment. So it's going to say, okay, I'm going to deploy to this environment, which is development. You can specify when you want these releases to occur, either now or later. And we provide options for defining these things like a schedule. You can also specify any steps you wish to exclude or any ones that you want to skip. So you can mark these if I had them listed. We can also specify what's called a failure mode. A guided failure mode is basically if things go wrong, what do you want to do? You can also define a bunch of other options as well, where you get packages. Packages are basically the building blocks of your applications. So let's go ahead and deploy this thing. Now, again, we're not doing anything complicated here. What we're doing is essentially running a script. So we're not deploying any application. You haven't seen me build anything. All we're doing is we're just running a script and executing that against a worker. So that worker is provided to us because I'm utilizing Octopus Cloud for this environment. So it's going to go ahead and run that off. Again, it has to provision the worker. So there's a bit of a setup here. But when you go and run this thing through, it will do so in conjunction with the worker itself. And when that's done, you'll see in our task log, which everything is audited here. So we have a task log that audits everything out. If you have variables that are executed here, it will be part of that. Unless they're marked as sensitive, sensitive variables actually get masked out. And so there's a lot of nuance there. You can also route those logs to a variety of locations as well. And so, great, we've executed our first deployment. And so if we take a look at actually what happened, we can take a look at the task log here. And the task log is basically sort of a rundown of everything that was done during that execution. We have these filters here that I can specify to expand on the log level that I want. And so you can see here, I've gone ahead and I've done this live here. So I've spawned a worker. I've executed the worker against a Windows environment that's provided for me. And there's my statement, hello world, from the step that I ran as part of the deployment process. So excellent. We have this now defined as part of this process. There's a bunch of other things that I can do as well. So there's a bunch of other things that we can see, but that's basically the gist of what Octopus looks like in terms of a deployment from a very high level perspective. So moving back to slides, what you've seen is something that can run in conjunction as part of the deployment process. So imagine, if you will, I was using a CI server. We'll take a look at an example of that in just a second. But imagine that you were seeing me use a CI server as part of that process. Once I pass control over to Octopus and I run that deployment process, that's essentially what we're doing. So that was the demo that you saw there. So these demos have a variety of parts and pieces. So here's an example of a deployment process you may see in action. This is just an example that we have. But it defines a variety of visual representations or cues that you can use for looking at a deployment process. So these include things like conditions. So you can say if one step fails, don't run from here on in. Or if it doesn't fail or is successful, etc. I can also have steps that run in parallel. So I can have concurrent steps if I wanted to. Denoted by different things. I've integrated markdown notes. This is really nice for sharing these deployment processes. And as I said before, you can run these steps in parallel if you so wish. And so you can define these steps as part of your deployment pipeline, which is great. So asking and looking at the way that Octopus works, there's a variety of things that you can do with Octopus. So switching to kind of more of the understanding the concepts behind Octopus, there's a variety of things that we provide out of the box. So first and foremost, these deployments are very reliable. As I mentioned before, when you snapshot a deployment process, it's containing within that all the things that go into that release. And so that makes it really reliable because we have a state that we can use that in a reliable way. In addition to that, you can also roll back these deployment processes. So if something fails, we have that built in as part of your deployment process. So you can actually roll back scripts that are executed. You can roll back steps that were executed as part of your deployment process. So if there's a failure at any point in the chain, you have assurance there that it will be okay. In addition to that, you can also use a feature we have called runbooks. So runbooks are a really great way for defining a set of ops automation. So typically when things go wrong, or if you're doing maintenance, your DevOps engineers will want to utilize a series of runbooks that you can execute in a similar way that you would run deployment processes. Runbooks are our facility for enabling that, and it's a feature that we have built into Octopus. So not only do we provide the deployment process, but we also provide the ops mechanism for running in conjunction with that. If you're working with something like containers, very hot topic these days, especially in the context of Kubernetes, for example, we have built-in support for that integration. So we have a Helm chart that you can use. We have integration with Kubernetes-like tools like Kustomize, for example. We support inline through YAML, and this is all exposed to you through a series of UI controls that you can easily understand. In addition to that, the thing that most customers like about Octopus is the fact that they can really set this deployment process up and then get a lot of consistency and speed as part of this deployment process. They don't have to worry or think about it. And our feature for tenants or multi-tenancy is a real win here, because as you're managing the various environments and the tenants that are involved as part of this, this turns out to be really important. An example of a tenant is an application that differs depending upon the type of customer it's being oriented towards. So a good example of this is, say you're a website for a hotel chain or a series of restaurants or clinics. These and other types of tenants you can actually support within Octopus. This is a first-class construct within Octopus that we support. You can define these tenants, and then you can see how those actually line up against your deployments with various versions and the various environments that you define. And as I said before, a lot of this is all underpinned by governance, risk, and compliance. So we audit everything. You saw an example of that audit log. We have support for single sign-on. We have built-in integrations as well. I mentioned ServiceNow earlier, Jira integration as well. We have the ability to push logs towards Sumo or Splunk for data analysis, for example. So there's lots and lots of stuff that you can use there as part of that process. And so now what I'd like to do is just jump into another demo showing some more complicated examples. So let's switch over here to an environment like GitHub Actions. So GitHub Actions is sort of like a workflow runner for GitHub. It's a really good way of defining these workflows. And this is typically done in a facility called YAML, which is a text-based format. If you've done any work with anything based on YAML, GitHub, Azure DevOps, GitHub, these are examples of how you can use that. The way in which you can communicate with Octopus is through a series of actions that we have built out of the box. So as part of this process, you'll define a build and test series of actions. But we have actions in the marketplace that you can use for doing a variety of operations against Octopus. So if I'm pushing packages to Octopus, if I want to integrate build info is a series of steps, Git hashes, etc., that you use to create release notes. I can also create releases directly within GitHub Actions as well. All of these are available through the marketplace, as I mentioned earlier. And the GitHub Marketplace is a great way to get these actions. There's over 20,000 of these in the marketplace today. And you'll find them by visiting github.com/marketplace. And then if you search for Octopus Deploy there, you'll find these actions available. So this is the way in which you can integrate within your GitHub Actions and to communicate with Octopus to kick off deployments if you so wish. So this is facilitated by that, and there's a variety of steps that you can execute against Octopuses through that. But that being said, there's integrations across the board when considering how Octopus works. There's integrations across the board for a variety of environments. So as I mentioned earlier, when defining your CI processes, there's a variety of environments that you'll want to use. So things like Azure DevOps, TeamCity, etc. These and other types of situations you can certainly target. And we have a website that shows all the steps that I showed earlier. So you can search for pretty much anything on here. So if you want to use a tool like Flyway from Redgate, you can see the series of steps that can execute there. We have a variety of other steps as well for things like .NET oriented steps, etc. So these and other ways in which you can integrate are available to you if you so wish. Let's take a look at another example here. This is showing a different instance that I have available. And so what you see here is not only different projects, but different project groups. So I have my project group for Kubernetes deployments, machine targets, and multi-tenanted projects. So looking at, for example, multi-tenanted projects, I can define my tenants here. These are my tenants that I have defined for my project. So I have internal, AppXTime, Canon, Records, and Radiant Industries. And if I take a look at my dashboard here for where various versions are deployed to, you can see I have the different deployments across the different environments for representing each tenant. And so these sorts of views give me a perspective of where I've deployed to across each of those tenants. Additionally to that, we also expose other information that's really useful for folks who are doing deployments. So for example, insights. Insights are a way of us exposing DORA metrics for deployments. And this is really a way in which you can measure the velocity of your deployments going forward. So we aggregate and analyze and display reports so that you can get a sense of how fast or the velocity of your deployments relative to your app pipeline. And we display these here. So we show you things like your tempo, your stability, etc. And so these reports give you a really good sense of where you're at as a team when doing a lot of CD processes. So you're doing a lot of deployments frequently, which a lot of customers do. You'll get these reports generated for you as part of that process. So these and other facilities are available for you to define. And as I mentioned before, there's lots of ways in which you can define these things. So jumping back to my earlier example where I define a process, I show you the ability of creating how to create a deployment processes with a series of steps. If you want to see an example of utilizing other steps, you can see the list goes on and on here. It's always a good sign when your scroll bar goes really small, but there's lots and lots of ways in which you can communicate with a variety of platforms. And so you define these processes very easily as part of this process. So you can easily add these as part of your pipeline. But if we take a look at some of the other examples that we can use built-in steps here, and we expose these capabilities directly to you. So if you've ever done any work with, say, IIS, Internet Information Service from Microsoft, this is our web server platform, you'll know that there's a variety of knobs and buttons that you can tweak as part of this experience. We expose all of that for you. So yeah, scrolling down here, you'll notice that we define things like what is your app, what is your application pool, what is your website. These and other facilities you would typically have to script. We expose those as a series of key value pairs that you can use. And a lot of these are bindable to variables that I mentioned earlier. So variables, this is utilizing a notation we have called Octostash. And this gives you an ability to bind the values to inputs. So when you're doing a deployment, you can use those as part of those. So you have a variety of options that you can define here for doing these things. And so this makes it a lot easier to work with platforms like IIS or Nginx or whatever web server you're going to be targeting. And we also include things like transforms. So typically when you deploy a .NET application, you may want to modify web.config. You can do that as part of this. So these and other sorts of aspects for a step are exposed to you. And you can see it's made part of the editor process. So I'm just going to save changes here. And you'll see when I go to my I haven't actually modified all the changes. So I'm just go ahead and go back to the dashboard and I'll discard changes rather. But when we expose these to you, you'll notice here in my dashboard, I can now evolve or move and prepare a deployment to go from development to staging. And so this is part of the power of utilizing a tool like Octopus. It gives you that facility, which is fantastic. Incidentally, if there are any questions that you have, I'm happy to answer them live. We have a few folks on the webinar now, but if you have any questions around sort of environments, feel free to answer them live. I'm happy to take your questions as we're going through the demo. So, but yeah, there's lots of things that you can take a look at here in terms of Octopus for your deployments. But again, it's just part of that way of defining the deployment process itself. So as I said before, if you're interested, you can go check out octopus.com, and this is our website. We have a variety of resources available to you there. So you can take a look at our docs. You can take a look at how these things kind of hang together. We have a variety of case studies as well, and so you can take a look at those if you so choose. We also have our series of integrations. We have a whole set of tools that also come available to you. So if you want, you can take a look at those. So if you go to our download section, just to give you a sense of what this looks like, we have a series of tools. So we have a CLI that you can use as part of this. So if you don't want to use a UI like our web UI, and you don't want to build an integration through YAML, you can use CLI to communicate directly with the server if you so wish. And we have a variety of integrations as well that you can use. So if you're integrating with Azure DevOps or Jenkins or TeamCity or GitHub, etc., these and other types of integrations are available to you. And so you can utilize those as part of your deployment process. In addition to that, I just wanted to take a second here and highlight the fact that we have some new capabilities available in our latest release, which was just shipped last month. We ship quite often, and so we have a bunch of new facilities available there. You can take a look at our roadmap, which is available at roadmap.octopus.com, and see all the features that we've shipped as part of our commitment to customers. So we have a bunch of features that we've recently shipped, and we're utilizing calendar versioning here for this. So you can see we've added features. And so if you're at all interested, you can take a look at all the features we've shipped just over the past few months, which is great. And we're also taking your feedback, so you can submit your ideas if you so choose for new features going forward. Awesome. So lots and lots of great stuff there. And as I said before, if you have any questions, I'm happy to answer them. All right. Done a lot of talking. If you're all curious to see what this looks like, you can check this out up on octopus.com, and feel free to let us know if you have any questions. So I don't see any questions in the queue, which is fine, and we'll go ahead and wrap things up. Thank you again for your time and attention. We really appreciate it, and we will see you next time on the next edition of. Oh, there is a question hanging on. Sorry, there's a question here. I'm just learning how to implement it in my projects. I think it is excellent. Everything you explained. It has great scope and a lot of utility. Thanks a lot. No problem. Thank you for attending. I really appreciate it. If you do have any questions, again, feel free to let us know. We're across the board in terms of support. We often watch a lot of subreddits, or we have our help forum. You can submit questions through to our support if you so wish. Really great ways to communicate with us. We really appreciate it. So thanks a lot. Cheers, guys. We'll wrap things up from there. Thank you very much for your time and attention. We'll see you on the next one.